to follow my friend, the honourable member for Leeds West, who I'm very proud, actually, to serve on her select committee, because I think we do a lot of really good work, and certainly my pride as a member of Parliament is augmented by the experiences I have as part of that committee. And I was among those who were in the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, just a few days ago, in relative terms, when we had the debate to amend the law to set a net zero carbon target by the year 2050. The damage that humankind is doing to the earth and the climate emergency resulting represent a call to action for the whole world. And Britain, with its historic role in shaping the industrial age, accepts its unique responsibility to assume a global leadership role in tackling climate change. But we are only 1% of the world's emissions, so we must use all of the soft power at our disposal to influence the nations of the world to approach the challenge of climate change with the serious intent the times that we are living in demand. I will.
The honourable member is making a very powerful point. He mentions the challenge of climate change, and he's right to, but does he not also recognise some of the opportunities in terms of that transition to the low-carbon economy, not least in Scotland, where we both come from, with our renewables potential?
Indeed, I'm grateful for that intervention. I'm going to come on to talk about some of those issues and some of the lessons that we can learn and some of the opportunities we can take advantage of, particularly from a Scottish point of view. But it is each generation's responsibility to preserve and sustain our planet for those who will follow them. I believe that this generation accepts the seriousness of that responsibility. But politicians, we owe it to the people of our country to hold an honest conversation about what the change in the law we made just a few days ago amounts to. Setting targets in law, holding debates, setting up committees, publishing reports is clearly not going to do the job itself. This is the most difficult transitional change we will ever go through as a country, and we shouldn't minimise the challenge. And we do ourselves no favours by minimising the nature of the challenge we face. And I'm going to refer as well to the evidence that we received yesterday from Sir David Attenborough, appropriately enough, I would say, in the Thatcher room. Because we should never forget that Margaret Thatcher was the first politician of stature to highlight the issue of climate change and the dangers that it posed to the whole world, most especially the poorest people on the planet. She did that 30 years ago this coming November at the United Nations. So it was in the Thatcher room that we took evidence from Sir David Attenborough. I really doubt that anyone has done more to raise public consciousness of humankind's wanton abuse and neglect of the planet and the impact of climate change than Sir David. And as was already mentioned by the chair of the Select Committee, Sir David was indeed a star witness. The public gallery was packed, significantly, almost, I would have said, exclusively with young people. And at one point, Sir David turned in his chair to face them, and he applauded them. And he told us, it is their world we are playing with. It is their futures that are in our hands. If the faces around here do not inspire us to do that, I don't know what will. It was an inspirational moment. I had the opportunity to ask him if he was optimistic about our ability to meet the challenge of climate change. And he said, I see no future in being pessimistic, because that leads you to say, to hell with it. Why should I care? I believe that way disaster lies. I feel an obligation, because the only way you can get up in the morning is to believe that actually you can do something about it, and I think we can. Whether that is optimistic or not, he went on, I do not know. And whether, in fact, it is going to produce a result or not, I do not know. But that is the only way I can operate. I have to get up in the morning and say, something has to be done, and I will do my best to bring it about. The House will not be surprised to learn that in the time I've been a member of the Select Committee, Sir David is the only witness at the conclusion of his testimony that has elicited a standing ovation from the members of the committee and the people in the public gallery. And in fact, Sir David is the only witness that the committee has ever asked for a photograph with. So the young people of the United Kingdom are ahead of the curve on this. And it is for us in this House to take up the baton to build a new cross-party consensus. I really do agree with what was said earlier in relation to the need for this to be something that rises above the cut and thrust of party politics.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I'm jealous of him for having been able to hear such amazing evidence in person yesterday. Does he agree with me that perhaps the edge that young people have on older generations is that they understand the existential nature of the climate change threat? They genuinely see it as a challenge to their ability to live the life they want to lead in the future. And the sooner that we can convey that existential threat to older generations, the sooner that we will gain the public consent necessary to close meaningfully with these huge challenges of addressing climate change.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This is a time for us to unite the generations and the nation itself in order to tackle this challenge that lies before us. Yes, I know that we have filled columns and columns of space in Hansard discussing Brexit. And I know it's the point of national obsession for the moment. But in truth, the issues that we're discussing in this debate transcend any of the matters that relate to Brexit, which will one day, I hope, very soon, be a chapter in the story of our nation. Whereas this is about the future of our planet. And young people absolutely do get that. But it is essential that we build a cross-party consensus on this issue by dealing with the issues as they arise on an evidence-led basis. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, said in its most recent overview of climate science, warming of climate system is unequivocal. And since the 1950s, many of the observed changes are unprecedented over decades to millennia. The atmosphere and the ocean have warmed, the amounts of snow and ice have diminished, and sea level has increased. So I repeat, it is vital that we have an honest conversation between ourselves as political representatives and with the people we represent in the deliberations that we participate in this House. The CCC has said there is currently no government strategy to engage the public in the transition to a low-carbon economy. They added, this will need to change. And I think that that warning, that very strong nudge, needs to be accepted by all of us on the government side of the House. And there needs to be a shared determination to address the issue of the need for a national conversation on this subject. I know that my constituents reach out to me, of all ages, to discuss the issue of climate change because it concerns them. Sir David Attenborough yesterday mentioned how 90 seconds, 2 minutes clip in one of his documentary series in relation to the use of plastics and the damage that plastics are doing to the ecology of the oceans of the world had galvanised a whole body of opinion, not just in this country but across the world. That was reflected in a meeting that I attended just the Sunday before last with the Stirling Methodist Church. They have a Green Team, and I attended one of their Green Team meetings. And they wanted to talk to me about ideas that they had, suggestions that they were sharing and wanted to offer more widely about how people could choose to act, how they could even choose to approach in terms of mental attitude the individual need that we have to establish our own net zero carbon target. And I couldn't help but think about that when I was listening to my honourable friend, the member for Chichester, because I'm sure that in addition to sending a first-class member of Parliament to this House in the form of my honourable friend, they've also done the planet a power of good by reducing my honourable friend's flights from 200 to something a little bit more manageable. And so we do have an individual responsibility in terms of our own lifestyles. Now, in that meeting with the Methodists, we shared together as Christians that we felt we had a covenant responsibility to be keenly aware of our responsibility as stewards of the earth, and that we owed it to each other and to our children and our children's children to bring about a wider conversation in Stirling and beyond Stirling about what these new net zero targets will mean in terms of how we choose to change our individual behaviour and our lifestyle expectations, not least in terms of diet. And we must be under no illusions as to the real change that will be required of our country and of us as individuals if we are to meet the challenge that we have set ourselves of a net zero target by 2050. So may I make a short list now of some of the areas, to coin a phrase or to borrow a phrase from Winston Churchill, where we need action this day. Let me start with single-use plastics. Pragmatically speaking, there is a need for us to address this issue. There will always be a place for plastics, single-use plastics even, for medical purposes, for food hygiene and other really specific purposes. But we must, I think, take the default position that plastic should not be used as a single-use material. I earlier intervened on the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Dundee West, to highlight a report that appeared in the Scottish press just in the last few days that mentioned that Scottish households alone are spending £600 million just on the packaging, on the goods that they buy, which they are then either recycling or disposing of.
Thank you for the opportunity to intervene. I've been visiting schools and have done for a long time now, and they all want to be plastic-free schools. But the pupils are saying to me that actually just within the school canteens, within the just what is supplied to the school, which they have no control over, so many items are wrapped in single-use plastic, and the children are literally at their wits' end because they feel that they haven't got the power to actually really bring about change. What do you think we should be doing about that?
Well, we need to do something. And I think we need to have the discussion about what that means, because I think this House has a part to play in that something that we need to do. And I have become personally aware, much more aware than I've ever been, of the extent, of the volume of single-use plastic there is in my life. And I know that some of my honourable friends on this side of the House, and I think honourable members on this side of the House, at the time of Lent, engaged in a fast to clear their lives of single-use plastic. And that certainly is exemplary in terms of setting the pace for us, for all of us in this place and for the whole country. But I really think that we do need to apply some fresh thinking to the urgency of dealing with single-use plastic. Now, I mentioned earlier as well to the honourable gentleman, the member from Dundee West, that we need to have action on the proposed deposit return schemes. I know these things take time to put together, and I know it's very important. There is much discussion about it within this Parliament, within Whitehall, and of course with the business community, especially the retailers, who will have to manage much of this. And I do appreciate, and it's on an all-party basis, that the Scottish Parliament has done some pioneering work in this regard. But I would ask the Minister, surely it is not beyond the realms of possibility that all the governments on these islands, at all levels, should work together to create a single UK-wide scheme for the return of particularly plastic bottles, and that will remove any danger of geographic anomalies or cost anomalies, and that by working together we can help cement the idea of deposit return with the public. And the sooner we can get onto that, the better. And the second thing I'd like to mention is transport. I don't want to repeat some of the things that have been said there, but it is important that we understand that 15% of global man-made carbon emissions come from cars, and we have a huge opportunity to move to low-emission vehicles, but we need to have many more electric charging points. The infrastructure is patchy to non-existent, and it does not give confidence to potential purchasers of low emissions or electric vehicles. And the planning laws right across these islands should be changed to insist that all new private houses and commercial properties have car charging points as part of their initial construction. And we need to have a single system for using car chargers. Expecting drivers to have several cards in their wallets, have separate registrations to use different charging points, it's just absurd if we wish to make it easy for people to make the transition to use electric vehicles. And governments need to do what governments can do, and only governments can do, which is bring together every party so that there is a sense of coordination and working together at the heart of this national infrastructure project. So I would ask again the Minister, as I asked just a few days ago in a previous debate, where is the promised competition for a standard charging point design, the so-called Hayes hookups? Where is this competition that was promised? Because I think, again, this could capture the imagination of the wider public. Now, with better infrastructure will come, yes, named after our friend, the honourable member, the right honourable member, the Hayes hookups. With better infrastructure will come greater consumer confidence. But the government should restore the buyer incentives on EVs that it reduced last year, because they have had some impact. And we must be ambitious. We should set new targets to eliminate the use of internal combustion engines from our cities by the middle of the next decade. I think that is realistic, and it is important. I did agree with something that was said on the other side of the House. It is important that government gives a very clear signal to manufacturers when it comes to these matters, because investment decisions do take place within the framework of public policy. And yes, I will.
Just on that point, I wonder if the honourable gentleman shares with me my excitement about the potential for wave and tidal energy. And would he join with me in calling on his government to step up and offer the kind of support for the sector that could enable it to just shift up a gear or two, start commercialising their projects so tantalisingly close to realisation, and then not only contribute to the environment changes that we seek, but also, of course, offer our economy many more jobs?
Well, I agree that no technology should be off the table. All of the new technologies and all of the existing technologies should be part of the consideration of the government in this area. But going back to the point I was actually making, which was about the support that I wish to give to my honourable friend, the member for Leeds West, in relation to our committee's finding that we need to set a clearer ambition, a bolder ambition in relation to the discontinuation of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans, which currently is 2040. It needs to be something nearer 2030, 32. The third point I wish to make is about housing, which was already made by previous speakers as well. And, you know, let me say this as a Scottish Conservative. I know that other members of the House sometimes must wonder what's going on at this end of the chamber, where my colleagues and I have an occasional ding-dong with the members of the SNP opposite, all for good reason, I'm sure. But, you know, the UK government should actually follow the lead of the Scottish Parliament, where, with cross-party support, the Scottish Government has set out a package of measures to upgrade the energy efficiency of homes and commercial properties, including a detailed plan and milestones. And the one thing that's often lacking when it comes to the plans that are created in Whitehall is detailed plans and milestones. I will.
Actually, and I know this is the second point, but he makes a very good point about the Scottish Parliament. When the 2009 Climate Change Act was passed in the Scottish Parliament, which was in excess of what was aimed for in this Parliament, that was because all the parties sitting in that Parliament came together, and it was during a period of minority government. And when you work together across, when you have a meaningful conversation, especially on critical issues like climate change, minority government can work.
There's sometimes a very strong case for minority governments, in the sense that you do then have to depend more on reaching out across the floor of the House. And it's true, in the Scottish Parliament, all the measures that we're discussing in relation to the environment and climate change have pretty much, I think, the unanimous support of the Scottish Parliament. And that is a strength, that's a political strength, because when the time comes, Madam Deputy Speaker, to change the Scottish Government in 2021 to a Conservative Scottish Government led by Ruth Davidson, we can be sure that those policies will continue. And so upgrading the housing stock, though, should become a national mission. It should become a national infrastructure priority. And the Government really should now set out its response to the National Infrastructure Commission's recommendations in relation to social housing, and should come forward with its own proposals to unlock the able-to-pay residential sector. And we need to consider incentives for the adoption of new technologies in heating, insulation and energy generation, and we need to do this across all types of houses. So I'd mention in my constituency in Stirling, in Kings Park, many of my constituents tell me that they spend a fortune on heating their homes because the heat disappears through the single glazed windows and old-fashioned roofs that they are required to have as part of the conservation area that they live in. Now, I'm a Conservative, I'm all for conserving, but I think it's also equally important that we conserve with consideration to the environment. And improving the insulation of our homes, upgrading the housing stock, is an investment with a return, as was mentioned earlier, in lower energy consumption, lower energy bills, and, as I said earlier, better physical and mental health. And pound for pound, this is a sound national investment from every aspect you look at it.
I thank the honourable member for giving me. He's making a lot of very valuable points here. I wonder if you would agree with me that supporting setting up a national energy company where all its energy comes from renewables, as the Scottish Government is doing, would he consider putting that towards the UK Government? Because not only does it take energy from renewables and boosts the renewable energy sector, but it also tackles fuel poverty head-on if it's done at cost, close to cost as possible. I
understand the motivation, but in good Scots tongue, I hae my doubts about whether that is actually a solution that's workable. Even in I know the Scottish Government are going to do it. The Honourable Gentleman says that they're going to do it. We'll see what happens. But I do have concerns about that. I think there are other ways to get to where we want to get to without setting up some kind of state retailer for energy. Now, I'm coming near to the end of my remarks, but I do want to mention the fact that we do need to consider new electrical infrastructure. We need to consider the national wiring, whether or not it has the capabilities that it's going to need. I really don't see that anytime soon there will be a plethora of charging points around the country where you can recharge your electric vehicle in a few minutes, because we just don't have the wiring to support that kind of recharging network. And I just want to mention something as well. I know the Minister would be disappointed if I don't mention this, so I'm going to mention it, and that is the issue of smart meters. Now, there's a lot of money being spent on advertising smart meters as an individual step to be taken by households across the country to attack the issue of climate change. And I support that, because smart meters are a vital component to the creation of a smart grid. But I do really think that the government should explain to the House how we're getting on in relation to the target of rolling out smart meters to all premises by 2020, because I think, in all honesty, that target seems like a very long way off from what I know of the facts as they stand at present. And I think the House... Yes, I will give on that.
I share his concern about the pace of the smart meter rollout also. I also wonder if the technology has just now been overtaken by so many of the sort of Internet of Things enabled functionality that is going into people's homes. Moreover, does he have real concern that, given the slow pace of deployment for smart meters, doesn't fill one with hope for the 1 million homes a year we have to retrofit with zero carbon heating systems in order to hit our net zero targets?
A very good intervention from my honourable friend. I do have a lot of those concerns. I have concerns about the status of the SMETS 2 metre installation, for example, particularly in Scotland and the north of the country. There's technological reasons as to why the pace there is slower than it is in the rest of the United Kingdom, and where we are in general with SMETS 2 metre installation. And what about SMETS 1 metres? How are we getting on with having the DCC adopt them? I think the answers to these questions may be difficult for ministers to bring to the House, because there are no shortage of challenges in relation to smart meter rollout. But we really should face up to these challenges, and we have an opportunity now, I think, to properly review where we've gotten to. I mean, a fundamental question is how many SMETS 1 meters that have been installed will need to be replaced because they can't be adopted by the DCC. I hope the government might make note of the need for us to have some kind of an update, whether in a written or other form of statement. And the generation of energy is important. I already mentioned that no technologies should be off the table, and we should consider all possibilities. Now, one of the final points I wish to make is about carbon capture and storage. And the point that's been made in relation to carbon capture and storage, and was part of our Select Committee report, is that there is a need for a collaborative... I'm getting the signal, and I will conclude. The carbon capture and storage, yes, it's a very interesting point, this. Well, it's for me anyway. We have the opportunity of a first mover advantage, and we need to start removing carbon from the atmosphere. Otherwise, there is just no hope of us becoming a net zero emitter by 2050. And we should be prepared to take some bold initiatives and some risks with the rollout of this technology. And finally, we need to plant more trees. They are nature's carbon capture and storage specialists. And the current targets in England, frankly, are modest to the point of embarrassing and really not appropriate to a net zero target. And again, because of the rich offering of devolution in our wonderful union, there are lessons to be offered. There are lessons to be offered to the UK government from Scotland, which I hope they would be wise to examine closely. So, in closing, in returning to Sir David Attenborough's evidence, we must remain hopeful. The challenges we are facing and talking about today are surmountable. We must play to our strengths as a nation, and we need joined-up government across these islands, the United Kingdom at its best, working in partnership with our world-class university sector, the broadest possible coalition of industries and business interests, and our global reputation as inventors, creators, innovators and renovators, which must now be put to the ultimate test. We must find new ways to leverage old technologies, and we need to be bold and take risks with new technologies as never before, and then take those solutions and our expertise to the wider world, where the UK can properly take its responsibilities as the leading developed nation in the arena to the next level. With proper investment, the new businesses that will grow and develop from this economic revolution will provide the quality of work and the valuable employment of the future. And if we are wise enough, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we are honest enough, if we are brave enough, the opportunities may be limitless. And we can sustain our planet, our blue, teeming with life planet, for generations to come.
John McNally.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and pleasure to follow the honourable member for Stirling. Could I just say, we were talking about batteries earlier, and before the speech from the honourable member for Stirling, my hearing aid batteries was working, but